opinion. I simply cannot understand it. I cannot explain it. I cannot explain what is going on with this vehicle and with its armor.
Well then, let me explain it, DezGamez. Hello everybody, my name is RagingRaptor and I welcome you to a new World of Tanks high school video. Today, explaining the Object 257's armor. And before we start with the video, I really want to thank DezGamez for allowing me to use parts of his videos to explain this awkward yet still interesting build tank. And saying thank you to Dark Souls for testing with me around 2 hours on the test server with different high caliber and smaller caliber guns. And with this, to explain this tank, we have to go through a little bit of theory and some things you need to understand in World of Tanks, some core game mechanics. This tank, the Object 257, is living because of its impressive out-of-bounds angles. Having a look at Overmatch and out-of-bounds angles and mechanics. What is important here is that AP and APCR shells have an impact angle of 70 degrees till they start to out-of-bounds. Well, if you exceed this 70 degrees impact angle, you will have automatically a bounce every single time. For heat shells, this is a tiny bit different because they have an 85 degree angle of out of bounds. And this is also why a lot of people suggest to you to shoot heat shells against tanks like the Stridswagen 103 and the Stridswagen S1 and the Stridswagen 103B. And this is also why the Stridswagen 103B has heat screens to actively counter this, well, this conundrum, this out-of-bounds angles, and help it to survive a little bit longer. And this is also, as we look further into the video of DezGamez.
And after some testing, I can say that lower AP penetration round works better than higher penetration APCR round versus this vehicle.
He is saying that he had got a feeling that lower penetration AP rounds have it easier to penetrate than high performance or high penetration APCR rounds. This can be also now explained with a second mechanic called shell normalization. First thing first, depending where exactly DezGamez is hitting the tank and how high the tank is he is shooting at the Object 257, it can be that he is sadly enough hitting a wrong spot and will simply out of bounds. It doesn't matter, as long as there is a 70 degree angle, we will out of bounds with either AP or APCR shell. The big problem here right now is though that if we hit the spaced armor plates up on the upper part of the hull, which is 30 millimeters thick, then it starts to depend if we are shooting AP or APCR shell. And this is why, because of the shell normalization. AP shells have a shell normalization of 5 degrees. But what does that mean? If an AP shell is hitting something at a 60 degree angle, the shell will adjust itself by 5 degrees. Those 5 degrees will give us a shell or a penetration of a shell normalization of 55 degrees, meaning we'll have it easier of penetrating the armor of the Object 257. And this is the interesting part. APCR shells only do that with a 2% value. And if we shoot at the spaced armor plates, here we have the Leopard 1 and the Object 430U, if we roughly get it onto the same position, which is not that easy, let's just turn it a little bit more. Now it looks roughly the same. We should be able to see that 200 to 250 millimeters, that we have it easier to penetrate with the AP shells. Again, because of this shell normalization. And this is even more interesting. If you shoot at those spaced armor plates, the shell normalization occurs twice. Once for hitting the spaced armor plate, meaning we will If we have it here, we have an impact angle of around 2 degrees, meaning we'll have an impact angle of 0 degrees because of the shell normalization. But afterwards, we're hitting a plate behind which is around at a 65 degree angle. Now, our AP shell will have another shell normalization of 5 degrees, putting it down to an impact angle of 60 degrees. The APCR shell, on the other hand, though, this one will have its penetration only going down to 60, or effective armor angle to 63%, meaning APCR shells, if they hit the spaced armor plate and no out to bounce angle, have it harder to penetrate the object 257. And we can also put this experiment even a little bit further. If we now take a new mechanic into the equation, which is called the Overmatch mechanic. I talked already a lot about this mechanic, and there are two key components to this mechanic. The first one being the auto pen mechanic, meaning if your caliber is 3 times the size of the armor, then you will always penetrate. It has to be higher though, so a 122mm gun will always penetrate a 40mm armor plate. This is also why, for example, an SU-100 with the 122mm gun can auto-penetrate the E-100's engine decks, because they're only 40mm thick. With the Object 257, this is not working. This is only working on the turret roof because it is 30mm thick, and on the engine deck, which is also 30mm thick, meaning anything above 90mm of caliber size will have auto penetration there. Like, for example, the 42-pounder gun of the Carnarvon or the Churchill gun carrier. Now though, this is not applying to the side armor right now. There is no gun in the game at the moment which can auto-penetrate the lower side armor or the side armor in general of the Object 257. This is due to that it is 65mm thick. This would mean we would need a caliber or a gun in the game which shoots AP with a size of 195mm and more. It used to be in the game. It's called T92 and GWE100, excuse me there, but they don't have AP shells anymore, so there is no way to auto-penetrate those lower spots. But now comes another important factor. It is if your caliber is twice the size of the armor thickness, then we have a special equation which is called the basic normalization times 1.4 times the shell caliber divided by the nominal armor thickness. So, for example, and this will be the new shell normalization. So, for example, if we take something like the Object 268 version 4, as you can see in the background, we will have it tested at different ranges, and now we also did some different tests. We have the 268 version 4, the Jagdpan 700, the 183, the Foch B, the Foch 155, the T100 light tank. And we are putting our tanks at 40 and different meters range. We all start at 20 meters and then go up in meter range to get a good or decent feeling of this mechanic. Because we now take as example the 152mm gun. If we make 65 times 2, we get 130mm of caliber size. So, if we have a gun which is greater than 130mm, it will actually actively start to use the 2 caliber rule. We now have a 152mm gun on the Object 268 version 4, meaning the basic shell normalization as it is AP is 5 degrees times 1.4 times the shell caliber 152 divided by the nominal thickness of 65, meaning we have a new shell angle of 16, which is actually impressive. We now have a shell normalization of 16.36 degrees. That is a whole lot more, and as soon as we are out of those out-to-bounce angles, well, it's still gone. That's quite interesting in that kind of sense. It even is also important to notice that depending where you are hitting and depending how high the tank is we are shooting at with, it depends where we are penning. And in most of those examples which we have is that the upper part of the armor above the tracks will always be earlier penetrated than the lower parts where the tracks are. Not because of the track links, because of the fact that the angle is most of the time worse. If we take the Jack Pansy E100 as another example, you can see even though it has better penetration than the 268 version 4, it is starting to pen at 40 meters and 50 meters respectively. This is due to its higher size and that it's shooting from above at this special 65mm plate. And as soon as we hit 70 degrees angle, we will have an auto bounce. In that sense, if we would have shot heat shells, we would be penetrating it without a problem. But now, if we have the 183, which is a little bit lower than the Jack Pansy 100, the gun is a little bit mounted a little bit lower, it is actually interesting that, well, if you are hitting at 20 meters the upper side armor, you will be penetrating because of this enhanced shell normalization. The Foch B's problem is that it has a way too small caliber to actively use this 2 caliber rule, meaning it also needs a lot more range till it is consistently penetrating the upper and lower part of the Object 257. On the other hand, the Foch 155, yes, it has more penetration, but this is in those terms not important. It has a 155, as the name suggests, millimeter caliber, meaning it will has this auto pen angles, this 2 caliber rule angles a lot earlier. This 2 caliber rule can from time to time really save your butt cheeks if you're fighting the Object 257. And to lastly show that it's all about those auto bounce angle, we have the T100 light tank standing at 20 meters. Only the 183 is being able to penetrate the 257 at 20 meters. And you can see, without a problem, it's penetrating the upper and the lower part of the armor, and even sometimes damaging the other side of the vehicle. But now, there is one last thing which DezGamez couldn't really explain.
Yet another penetration and I tracked him. I tracked the other side. I mean, how the fuck is that even possible? What is going on with this vehicle?
So this is due to the fact that if you are shooting at a vehicle and penetrate it successfully, the shell doesn't simply disappear. It still travels through the tank for a little bit. In this sense, and for that we have the 430U and later on the Rheinmetall Borsig Waffenträger to explain this mechanic. And the basic concept is that, for example, you have a 122mm gun. You have, or your shell will fly through the tank at least, or no, not at least, always 122 millimeters or 1.22 meters. And now if we look at the 257 from the side, you can see that even though the armor model is showing something differently, if we go into the visual model, you can see that those parts are not connected correctly. So we are going here into the collision model, and you can see if we compare those two models together that there are those plates here. Yes, those plates are not really good parts of modeling the tank because they make it a lot harder to penetrate, but they also makes it for us easier to explain how a shell is traveling through the tank. So if we are hitting this part here, the shell will travel as when it hit our armor plate, which is here, not an external model. It will travel through the hull of the vehicle when we are using the object for 30U, 1.22 meters through this part here. And as you can see, it's a really small part. It will go through and hit the other external module, being the tracks. And this is how you personally can detrack two or both sides of the Object 257 with one shot from one side. You have to watch out though, and you can see it in the gameplay. You have to align the tracks perfectly, and you also need to be lucky with the module damage, because this also from time to time varies. But we were able, as we detract the tracks, to constantly, or most of the time, not constantly, penetrate and do track damage to the other side. It sometimes depends how the saving throw is. But, and this is also important, sometimes you can even use this mechanic to do some ridiculous pen shots on things with detracking damage. We can even go up to say that with the introduction of the new Object 705A, depending where you hit, in a decent enough angle, you can actually penetrate its lower plate and detrack its tank. This is also something which often occurs on tanks like the Patriot or the Pershing. Because if we look at the Pershing, you can see if we hit the lower plate in a decent enough angle, we not only have weak armor, but the shell will travel through it and hit the frontal road wheel, turning it into a detracking shot. Well then guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope I was able to explain all the important things, and well, yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to check out DezGamez video about the Object 257, and don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and probably a subscribe. This was RagingRaptor, and I'll talk to you all later.